Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad to see all of you. I want to thank you for coming. I'm excited to introduce Letha Wilson for a talk this evening in tandem with her return to RIT. And this is all presented by the Anna-Ballarian Visiting Artist Series, which is a series that brings exhibitions, outdoor sculpture, and artist engagement to the RIT campus, and it encourages interdisciplinary practices and discourse. And I think Letha has certainly embodied as much of that interdisciplinary spirit as one can in a 4-day visit to RIT. During the install here, she's been over in the wood shop, getting wood scraps. She was downstairs in the sculpture foundry, filing metal and cleaning. And she was upstairs in the ISL printing lab, printing photographs for this exhibition. And she spent time with graduate students in fine art studio, sculpture, and photography and related media. So about as much as you can do in 3.5 days. I want to thank Shane Durgee and the Bevier gallery staff for helping us install this exhibition in such a short window of time as part of Letha's visit. Letha visited campus a few years ago as a Charles Arnold Lecture Series guest and speaker, and since that time she's been pursuing more iterations of her work for outdoor placement. And as soon as I saw these works, I knew we had to have her back and feature one of these pieces on our campus. Last August, Letha installed Craters of the Moon Fullback, made from UV photographic prints on weathering steel. It's installed just outside on the north lawn of Gannett and Booth Halls, even though it's 3/4 covered in snow at the moment. It's sort of melting now. It's in close proximity to another recent installation by Joshua Inc., who was also an Anna-Ballarian visiting artist. And I just want to shout out to Will Tracy, Kelly Wilton, and Granville Carroll, who all assisted with Lisa's sculpture installation last August. It was a pretty hot day. And Craters of the Moon Foldback will be on view for the next 2 years or so, as these outdoor sculptures will rotate periodically over the years, so we have some time to enjoy it. Studio Sketches is an exhibition of sculptural models and artist book pages, along with a custom installation for Bevier Gallery, which is on view through March the 12th. What's great about this show, I think, is that you can see evidence of Letha's moves between 2D photographic practices into 3D, sculptural, site-specific, and even architectural forms. And getting a glimpse into this process is really a privilege for us, as this work has not been previously exhibited. So for just some background, Letha Wilson was born in Hawaii. She was raised in Colorado, currently works in Brooklyn and upstate New York. She received her BFA in painting from Syracuse University and her MFA in combined media from Hunter College in New York City. Her work has been showed widely in group and solo exhibitions, including Mass MoCA, the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, the Columbus Museum of Art, Art in General, and the International Center for Photography, among many others. Her work has been reviewed in Art Forum, Art in America, the New York Times, and the New Yorker, among others. She's also been awarded artist residencies at Yaddo, McDowell, the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, and the Anderson Ranch Art Center. She was there last summer. In both 2019 and 2014, Letha was awarded the New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Photography. Her work is represented by Grimm Gallery with locations in New York City and Amsterdam, as well as Christophe Gaillard Gallery in Paris, where she recently completed a solo exhibition called Valley of Fire. Letha's going to show some slides up here, and then we'll have just some informal conversation between Letha and I and open it up for Q&A at the end. So if you want to ask Letha a question or have a comment, we welcome those. And then also feel free to stick around a bit after the talk if you'd like to say hello and take a look at the show. For now, I'm glad all of you could be here tonight. I'm excited to welcome Letha back to RIT, so if you'll join me in welcoming our Anna-Ballarian visiting artist, Letha Wilson.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you, John. Very wonderful introduction. Thank you all for having me. It's been a really fun and quick week that I've been here. And yeah, really kind of a wonderful project to incorporate this piece outside and have this show here and be able to give a talk and meet with some of the students. So thank you, John. And we'll talk a little more later. I'm going to just scroll through a bunch of images of my artwork and give you a sense of kind of where I'm coming from. So, as John mentioned, even though I was born in Hawaii, I moved to Colorado when I was like 5, so I don't really remember Hawaii. But my childhood, and particularly my father, was very interested in the landscape. We spent a lot of time hiking in the Rocky Mountains. Starting from when I was in about 6th grade, we would do these week-long backpacking trips every summer as a family, and just got into some very deep, sort of remote places that really kind of stuck with me when I moved to the East Coast. And basically I went to Syracuse and never really looked back. I mean, I moved to the East Coast to stay there, but I always go back to Colorado to visit my family, and so it kind of remained, these landscapes sort of remained with me. I often also think, like, in our family, like maybe there'd be some sort of camera on these trips, and my dad would decide what's the best one, and at the end of the summer, blow it up and put it on the wall. So our family photos there were no people in them. They were just like the trees and the landscapes and the hikes. So when I moved to the East Coast, went to Syracuse, I was a painting major, but I was really, even from the beginning, interested in ways that works could, defy these boundaries of mediums. Could it be a painting and a sculpture? Could it be abstract and representation? And I was also already incorporating kind of these landscape photographs into my work. So I moved to New York City in 1998, and with really not much, I had an unpaid internship at Artist Space lined up. And I took a year before I went to grad school at Hunter College. And at grad school, I was continuing to work with these landscape photos. This is, in real life, it's only like a 4x6 photo, but I used whiteout to white out one element of the photo. So it's working with these photos still and kind of trying to kind of get inside them or cut them up or sometimes abstract them. But at the same time, so here's another one where I whited out the cabin in the car. I started building rooms in grad school, and I was always really interested, especially as a viewer, like the sculpture in the room would be always the thing that excited me, or was very interested in environments and spaces that sort of enveloped you. So I worked for an artist who taught me how to build walls, and he installed walls at the new museum, so I was learned kind of how to build rooms and spaces. So the first pieces where I really literally merged together this interest in sculpture and photography was this series I called Extrusions. So this is actually from my thesis show in Hunter, and it's my dad and mom silhouette extruded out, sort of I was imagining as if the wall was coming out through the photograph using their outlines. And it's fairly large. The print is about 4x6 feet. So these extrusions were the first, I call photo sculptures that I made. And at that time, I felt like photography, I don't know, I was wondering, how can landscape photography be contemporary? How can it be more than just a wallpaper image or a calendar image or an Ansel Adams image? How can it be kind of busted open, really? So I felt like there was, even at that time, like in New York, in the reviews in the paper, there were photo galleries and then other galleries. I didn't understand that separation. I felt like it's just another material, it's just another tool. But I was also very specifically interested in pushing that. So these are some of my pieces for my thesis. I was also, making videos at the time. Another way of charting the landscapes by driving through. This was sort of this navigation, I call them possibilities for a car drive, this series. And there's just a couple stills here. And then I was also made some initial outdoor pieces using, again, my experience of building walls at a gallery. I was invited to do my first outdoor piece, and it's all reclaimed gallery walls that I used to make this lean-to structure outside that was up for about 6 months, which led to this piece at Socrates Sculpture Park, using all reclaimed drywall and wood from an art fair to make this sort of gallery garden, was the title. So, you know, I was sort of whatever, you know, kind of mixing it up in terms of materials and what I was working on. This was the last extrusion I made. It goes from my dad to a Joshua tree. And at this point I had been, you know, it was a couple years out of grad school, and I felt like there was a lot more to go with this idea, but my work was too expensive. It needed a show deadline to make. Like I wanted to develop a studio practice, you know, like something that every day I could have something to do, like my painter friends, you know. The other thing was I was dying to go on an artist residency, but I kept getting rejected. So I made my own artist residency in my parents' basement in like my brother's bedroom. I just like telling the story because it's, you know, if you feel that need to go and have your space, you can create it in many different ways. If you go on my Instagram account, there is, my mom wrote me an acceptance letter that's very cute to the residency in like marbled paper. It's very professional, but then it's like, Mom, at the bottom. So I appreciate their, you know, my parents' kind of understanding over the years. But I went there, and when I came back from that time, I feel like what I made, you know, in Colorado was more like reading books and kind of doing stupid drawings. But like when I came back, it sort of made me change how I approached my work. I wanted to use materials that had more of a relationship with the landscape. Those other pieces were styrofoam. So thinking of wood, how does wood relate to a 2x4 building material, or drywall as paper and rock, or glass? So these sort of natural materials. Also, I went back to the darkroom. So weirdly, all those other pieces were digital prints, and I learned how to print color in undergrad. So I started renting darkroom space and printing color prints because I was shooting with film anyways. And it actually made it less precious for me to be able to go to the darkroom and print a bunch, bring it back to the studio, and kind of wreck it. So it was sort of like I was a fish going upstream. Everyone's going digital, and I'm going deep analog at this time. And you can see from the show, like, a lot of these experiments are like, what can I do with a C-print? You know, what happens when you put it in concrete? So it really started my material push using traditional C-prints. So, sorry, this is the relationship between the images and the forms becomes a little more poetic. Maybe it's just a shadow or a line that starts off. Thinking about the photo as like a body or a form that you push forward and back. This is almost as if an arrow was going through what would happen to the edges of the photo. So that was all kind of chronological. I'm now gonna show the work a little bit more in different ways I approach thinking about the photograph. So the surface of the image, this is just spray paint. Another thing that changed for me over the years was how when I went to go shoot, when I would go to nature, I used to be looking for something, some sort of horizon or landscape. And then I realized, actually, I did a residency in Skowhegan in Maine. I also applied 10 years before I got into Skowhegan. I just gotta tell you, keep trying. But that's an amazing residency because you're in the forest. And then I was able to spend every day walking, and it changed what I was looking for. And I realized 2 rocks or a pile of sticks could also be an image that I work with, or it could be this, or it could be this. So it freed me so that when I'm going out shooting, anything goes. Like I can do no wrong. So that made it fun for me to shoot again. Anyways, surface of the image, how do I affect that? These are dipped in Portland cement. This is from the series. There's a few in the show here. And those were from about 2011. So now they're not chronological, they're kind of all mixed up. But these are face down in cement. The emulsion starts lifting off. What happens there? Thinking about the frame. Can it break through the frame? Can something move? This is called granite tumbler. Vertical horizon, where a horizontal image is pushed into a vertical frame. Coming actually out of the frame, in this case, with a small hole. That's cement. How is a photograph held to the wall? This was, for me, it was kind of a breakthrough piece. It was So shooting film just with a hand-me-down camera, and then one of my ex-boyfriends gave me a medium format camera for Christmas, like an old one, so I started shooting medium format. So this is one of the first ones I shot with that, and I really loved this image, and like, so pretty, what do I do with this? And then I just had this idea of like punching it in the face. So this sort of like holding it and tethering it, and there's a single piece of wood cut, and the wood's holding it together, but also the photo is kind of doing its thing. I actually think this piece in the show is sort of, definitely has a resonance to this kind of move. So how is it held up to the wall? In this case, there's a 2x4 that's pushing the photo into the wall. Thinking of the structure behind these walls, these 2x4s, the link to the tree. And then that idea on a larger scale, this is a 12-foot 2x4. So the experience of building walls in the gallery, I understood how they were made, so I could do something like this where I'm cutting holes and I understand how it's constructed. And this would be something I would make on site. And I just love this piece because the only thing holding up this photo is this pressure of the wood in the hole and it pushing against the wall. And a later piece with 2 pieces of glass. So often if I have a show, you know, sort of what are the materials I can work with? In this case, it was a show in Philly at an artist-run space, and they happened to be able to get like glass panes really easily, so this was something I built on site with 2 pieces of glass. I've done a few of these called slotted sunset, where there's holes in the drywall that I kind of carefully carve out, and then 2 sides of the image are pushed in. So again, that image is being held up just by the tension of the wall in the image. And another gesture from a gallery. This was in response to this gallery that was a circular gallery. How am I going to do what you're supposed to do? Like, who is the architect to design this circular gallery for us? So kind of a F you to that guy. So putting a hole in the wall in this giant plank. And the piece like this is almost like a performance where you have this sort of one shot, and actually repurposed this piece of wood. It is in my studio upstate and holding up my lights, so that was cool. And that was a photo I shot at Headlands. So I've had since my many rejections, I gradually started getting into some artist residencies, and I've been able to go some pretty awesome places and live there for a certain amount of time through these residencies. And there are so many different kinds, from very well-known to unknown, so I would encourage, if you're interested, to research that. How is a photo held up? In this case, a concrete pillar is holding it up. And a lot of times it'll be a small idea that I kind of work up to a larger scale. And also I take all the photographs of my work myself. People used to ask me that more, but now I don't know why they don't. Maybe they just assume it, but it's important to me. It's important to me that I go to these places. My time out in the wilderness and the spaces informs the work in so many ways. And it adds this layer of time too. So it's sort of this constant. Sometimes I think of it like gardening, like planting the seeds is doing the trip, and then coming back and looking at the images is growing the plants. And so it's sort of this giant continual process. And how's the photo held up? By a giant steel I-beam. What about the front and the back of an image? There's a lot of that play happening in these pieces. This was an early piece, but there's red paper on the back. There's these little cuts. You see the wall on the other side. And I just love that when you're kind of seeing 3 layers at once. And this was a series with bronze pieces. They go through the frame, much larger scale. And this is just a small print, but all the pages on this wall I've made 3 artist books, and these are all like the test pages, and some were final. But I love that about the book, that you can see the front and the back of an image, and then when there's holes, you can see through the other pages. So to me, that sort of goes into this realm. What's behind a photo? In this case, there's holes. This is just, for an installation at Art in General. There's kind of a hidden wall with a window behind it. There's a wall, a lot of times in galleries like architecture, there's windows behind walls, you would never know. So this was actually a shuttered window that hadn't been opened in like 30 years. So I took the drywall off, opened the window, put the drywall back on, cut the holes to line with the holes in the photo. And then at certain times of day, the light would come through the gallery onto the ground. I didn't plan for it to be like the Big Dipper. That's just like, I guess, synchronicity, I don't know. But I love that, and I love that when you stand close to it, you can actually feel the draft from the window. So that's something I've repeated. You'll see even in the show, steel pipe is used quite a bit. In this case, it's a view hole. It's also holding up the photograph. And you can see through to the other part of the gallery. And another installation where there's a hidden window. This was in Portland. And that's always my favorite, to like really be able to go to a space, come up with an idea, and respond to the architecture. And then it goes away. So they're actually ephemeral pieces, aside from this image of it, of course. And these are very new pieces, but again, the wall is an element. So the openings there, these are UV prints on steel that I'm welding onto frames. And folding the surface. I should probably make sure I'm not like going crazy over time. Okay, I'm gonna go faster. Thinking of the surface of an image, moving, hug. Even a simple fold like this, I use quite a bit. This accordion fold changes the image so much. Something like this, this is a photo I took at the salt flats, and I made a very small test with concrete, but when I sunk that horizon line in, it really changed. It changed from an image. It's this object, and actually I scaled it up, so this piece is about this big, but it weighs about 200 pounds. And now that I've started printing on metal and printing on different materials with UV printing process. It's giving me a lot more options and ways to kind of play. So this is really going back to that other form, but printed on zinc. Folded again with concrete. Hanging, this whole series I did where they're almost hanging from the wall, like sideways. Again, the steel pipe is coming. I keep looking at the steel pipe like, wow, it's really pretty much everywhere in my work. And in this piece, I really wanted that print to kind of drape against the wall and the floor. So it's printed on vinyl. And face down. This is one of my earliest steel pieces, and I just really like this idea of the photo that was face down and that you couldn't even see it. My dad hated it. He said, was it for the earthworms or what? He was like not happy, which is pretty funny. How strong is a photograph? Can it hold concrete? Can it hold up this piece of steel? And can it hold up these giant steel pipes? This is a piece I made and was shown in Paris. So I kind of made it in sections, and then the pipe was sourced from Paris. And concrete. Concrete is a material I started really playing with, around 2011 or so, like pretty seriously. I was just curious, like, can concrete be organic? Can it be feminine? Can it be curvy? Can it be different? We have this idea. I think that's something that runs through my work is think of like, what are my expectations of how a material should behave and ways I can change that or do something different, and maybe someone looks at it and said, oh, I never thought that could happen, so I'm really interested in kind of defying expectations for materials. So I started playing with concrete and sea prints, and it led me down this road. And then that bright yellow spot, a piece broke off, and the emulsion transferred onto it by some sort of, I don't know, understand it. This was a happy accident afterwards. And then I really had to go down this road like a scientist and take notes, and what kind of concrete, what kind of paper, what colors. And it was not really exciting stuff. It was really boring kind of, but like the point is, like, sometimes my explorations are almost more along the lines of a scientist. And I'm learning every time I make something, and then I'm getting ideas for other things. And then finally, this is pure concrete. And these pieces use the photo as the form, and it removes the photo and the concrete remains. So I have made a lot of concrete works. I'm just going to scroll through these. These are my largest ones. And they're all sea prints I print in the darkroom. And the process actually, like there's nothing digital involved. It's like me, the darkroom, the printing, the concrete, the studio, and the flipping. And I kind of love that, you know. I start thinking of how I started using steel frames in those pieces, having the steel be part of an element of the work. This is Bryce Canyon. Also, the titles of my pieces will always state sort of where the photos were taken, generally or specifically. Like this is merging an image, a photo of Yosemite with Hawaii. And then I started UV printing on the concrete and on the photographs in this new series. And that print actually goes over the frame itself also. And now, this is actually last year, but I went back to this idea of like coloring the concrete and making layers that way. And kind of having fun with that and thinking of all these other, you know, and even like, it's nice because I have this archive now of images. So like this is one I took in Hawaii. Like I was able to go back to Hawaii. I applied for and got a travel grant in 2014. That's like amazing. So I spent a whole month in Hawaii shooting. And now like, I use those images all the time. So, okay, now architecture or scale, thinking big, like this was the first large scale piece I used where the architecture is the sculptural element in the piece. This was at Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, 2012. And it was just this, you know, I'd had this idea in the back of my mind. I did this residency. I'd met the curator, and he's like, I have this idea. Why don't you come up with something ambitious, big? Let's see if we can do it. So it was sort of perfect for me. I knew the space. And they kind of built most of it while I wasn't there. Then I did this piece, again, using architecture of the gallery called Moonwave, making it curve, making it kind of thinking of the column as like a drawing line. And this photo I shot at the Grand Tetons. And this piece that goes through the gallery wall. This one's cool because I've actually been able to show it again and again, and it just requires me, you know, digging a hole out of a wall, if they'll let me. And I can push it as far into the other room as they let me. This is at Higher Pictures, and she's like, don't worry, there's nothing behind these walls. It's all good. And I start cutting, and then I hit pipe. I'm like, Kim, there's a problem. So it only went like this far into the gallery back room, but it was kind of fine. So sometimes you don't know. In scale, this was I did a public project last year that was like about 3 or 4 years in the making in an elementary school that's permanently installed there. So that was really great to be able to do something really large and permanent for the kids. And you know, a lot of these forms are repeating, but now it's like I'm using plexi as sort of, it's like the paper folding back from the cutouts. And lastly, outdoor pieces. So I kind of changed my order today, but this wall in a tree piece is something I first made in Skowhegan in 2009. This version is from 2010, so it actually was right before I did that indoor piece at Bemis, and kind of, to me, in my mind, lends to it. But speaking of materials that you're not supposed to do, have drywall outside. So this was a whole wall I built in this blue ash tree at the Morton Arboretum. And it was up for about 6 months. So the backside is all you can see. There's no screws in the whole tree. The tree was not harmed. Although when I was building it, this kid came up to me, Mommy, you should cut the tree. Like, totally freaked out, convinced I'd cut all the tree branches off. But it was okay. And the tree creates this haven for the work. It's actually protecting the wall. The wall is just a mirror for the tree. It's really, I love this project. And then the next outdoor project I really did, this was many years later, but now that I'm printing on steel, these pieces can go outdoors. So this was the first one that was commissioned for DeCordova Sculpture Park. And really, these sculptures are also coming out of these books, thinking about the two images and how they relate and folding the pages, which is why we decided to show those next to it. And I love how the quartz and steel changes over time. I hope the sculpture out here, you know, it's starting to do that, decay a little. Part of the reason I designed it was that image of the red rock, knowing the black steel will turn, the quartz and steel will turn red and rust. So it's it's always great when it can be outside. This is another piece that I created last year that was COVID shelved and came back to life. So it's like 8 feet tall. And finally, last but not least, this is the piece that I just finished last summer for RIT. So we thought now maybe like John would come up here, we just have a little conversation about, because it's a kind of unique project that I did here, if you want to. Sure. Oh, great. Yeah.
And feel free to ask questions too, because we'll just sort of turn this into a informal sort of Q&A session. But we thought we'd just spend a little time talking about this specific project and also the gallery exhibition. Because I think you caught, as she's talking about her work, she's always attuned to the space the work is residing in. And that was no different when we asked her to think about a sculpture for outside, but also with the exhibition. And one is, they're both temporary, but one lasts longer than the other. And we had a circular sculpture pad to begin with, and there's still a couple of empty ones out there. And so in the beginning, Letha, we talked about, I showed you these pads, I showed you the site, you kind of saw it all remotely for the most part. I mean, you've been here several years ago, but things have certainly changed in the front yard of our buildings. So how did you approach that? And then maybe we'll talk about the space too, because you were able to see the space when we installed the sculpture, and you're able to kind of think through that. But seeing it remotely and then making the piece for that circular base, how'd you respond to that?
Yeah, and I think also, so first of all, I was just really into these concrete circles at the base. That was almost my inspiration to start with. So I'm like, oh, well, what if, I'm going to make sure it sort of is a circle too, or talks about this, or is in scale to this. So in a way, like I made all these mini circle pads, and that was the start. And then thinking of how the form itself can relate to its base. And the base is an element with it. The other thing is, like, just to mention, like, John was like, and then we'll have a show, and he immediately was like, let's show your models for the sculpture. So I love that idea. And you can see when you go over there, a lot of times I have these ideas, I iterate. So you could see the model of the thing I actually made. I had 2 proposals. So that's like really fun, and it's sort of problem solving, but I really like having maybe certain parameters. Either I'm responding to the site, or even just starting with the pad and the base and knowing that circle is part of it. The other thing is I always like, maybe once a year I can take a trip to the West and gather all this stuff. And so I end up using those images, like they're like fresh meat, So for the next 6 months to a year. So this image I had taken at Craters of the Moon just 4 or so months beforehand. So it was kind of fresh. And it was almost like a happy accident of how well it goes to the Magic Building. Like, it really does have this conversation with the Magic Building, especially when we installed it. That wasn't the first thing on my mind, but I was actually more thinking about, this piece is a little unique in that centerpiece has no image. So just the steel, and imagining it turning red, and then having a different conversation with the image when it turns quite rusty.
It seems like it's a little bit full circle that you're working on outdoor sculpture now.
Full circle.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one. Sorry, a pun.
I'll try not to do that again.
No, you should.
But the thing that you talked about, that it's important for you to be in the landscape yourself and take the picture yourself, and that's part of the work. And then ultimately the work ends up in another landscape.
Yes, I love that.
That's what I mean. That it's really, it would be different if you were appropriating these images, but it's really important that the artist or you is in the space, and then the work is in a different space. You talk about
that too. And like, I mean, I have my own like memories of the places that I'm photographing to bring back. So there is something about but I really am interested in how every person has some sort of relationship to some sort of landscape, whatever that is. And cueing into that the viewer is the figure in the work, there are no people. When I had that piece at De Cordova, someone told me, I just love this, like someone was looking at the piece, they read the title, it said Joshua Tree on Hawaii, on there, oh, I love Joshua Tree, the way it smells, the air, the sound when I walk on the ground, like it triggered all these very bodily like memories. And I just love how it could do that for people. Even if you haven't been to this place, it might remind you of another place you've been, or it's just a very interesting connection. So I'm interested in that, people's memories of space and place.
To me, there's a really interesting balance between disrespect for the photograph, but a respect for the place you've been, and respect for the moment with the work. Because you know, we always talk about how Letha breaks the rules of photography. She rips stuff up and she pierces things through it and doesn't frame things right and all that stuff. But ultimately, you're still in for a genuine connection, as opposed to just framing a landscape photograph and making someone think of Joshua Tree.
Right.
We're seeing a surface or a color.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, I mean, that was sort of in the very beginning, it was like, how can the image do justice to the experience? Like, it can't just sit there and be flat and boring. It has to do something. Like, I'm gonna F this up. Like, these, like, they get so, you know, I put them through these processes that they become rock again. Push them in rock, and then this thing, and then water, seepage, and like these natural elements become an element, you know, in the work. And also, there's something about the balance of kind of a untamed nature with the human desire to put a hole in it or make a line or do something straight, just kind of understand it. So it is, each piece has this sort of balance, and it's not like a one good, but one bad. Yeah. It's complicated.
Right along with that, with the pipe, like how do you respond whenever people associate it with like putting a pipeline through a big landscape? Is that part of it?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, the question is about putting like an actual pipeline through a landscape, such as in North Dakota. The Dakota Access Pipeline, perhaps, is what you're referring to.
Or just like, do you see it as like a form, or do you get the pipeline question all the time? Like, what's your relation with that?
I mean, occasionally, I think it's totally legitimate conversation to question what we are. I mean, to me, it's not as didactic as like, you know, humans bad, nature good. It's complicated. So I would hope with the work, you're able to kind of think about it more, or think twice, or wonder, you know, it's asking to wonder what you're assuming about nature. And honestly, it's coming from a very reverential place of my appreciation and observation and being in these spaces. So it's, yes, it is that, but it isn't like overtly about the pipeline. But I have I love the reference coming into it.
Yeah, it seems like you could be mistaken for being like a formalist, like only dealing with formal language, shapes, color, surface, texture, but you even talk about how you treat concrete to see if there's a feminine aspect to it. So there are these hints of discourse happening.
Well, in the body, in the space, and just, I felt like every story I read about man conquering wilderness, or dude gets lost in the wilderness, or poor dude, like, where's my story? And you know, I just felt like it was always like a conquering story. We're gonna make nature good and be able to live here. And it's like way powerful. And that was interesting. When I moved to the East Coast, I felt like Colorado, the weather is so intense. These like people really, you know, you respect that and you fear it. So it's sort of that, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, talk about too that, because you were here to install the sculpture, put that in place, and then you were here looking at the space, and we were talking about sort of planning what we might do in the space, and talk about how you looked at the space and sort of treated this as a site in itself.
Yeah, so, you know, I came to install the sculpture and we did a very brief walkthrough in this gallery. I immediately saw all these walls. These are all walls that just usually hang art. And I was like, that's crazy, look at all these crazy walls. Like, what the heck, how can you not like talk about these walls? And I immediately had this idea for making a giant sculpture where I just like put a pipe through all these walls. And John was like, I don't think you can do that, basically. But it was like this moment where I just felt like, especially when you're standing up, there's not very many galleries where you can look out from above like that. When you're up there, I don't know, I just found these almost comical, like, there's so many walls. And it's so weird, but they're objects, and so I wanted to like put them together and blast through it. So that was one idea, which I didn't really know if I could do. We talked about the sculptures as models, which I liked a lot, and originally I was going to bring a couple more small-scale sculptures. But literally like 2 weeks ago, I was like, you know what? I don't think this makes sense. Like, because I thought the books was where the sculpture came out of for me, and I have these boxes full of pages. So I thought, what if I show all the pages? I mean, I only brought half of them, but show the pages from the artist books, because that really leads to this. And it also shows more of my process. So for this particular occasion, like, yeah, you all get to see the back. Like, none of these have ever been shown before. And it's more of my process, so you can see how it's like working through, try, maybe no. And I felt like that would be more interesting. And then I just pulled out these other older pieces that are all like, you know, I made 20, I showed 2, but I have these other ones behind me and over there that are more like, and I call some of them studio sketches. So just to give you a sense of the play that goes behind the final pieces. And that ended up feeling really right.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said in the beginning, I think watching the book pages next to your sculptural models, you can see how you jump from similar subject matter from a 2D perspective into a 3D. And even that, the way we sequenced those was a little bit random, a little bit, you know, Shane and I both got to play with those images, which was really fun. And, but it's almost like an exploded book, right? You are looking through these images to present them in a book sequence, which there's 3 of them, right? And we do have some additional prototypes, I guess, if you will, of books at the front desk. And if you want to look at those, we can help you with that. But do you see these differently now that they're exploded out on the wall, or is it just like you see them as process, like this is the way you normally would see them, just in kind of different iterations and patterns?
I mean, it's very nice to revisit them because they've been in a box for like 8 years, or I mean, some of them for a while. But when I'm working on the books, I actually do first put them on the wall, so it makes total sense to then put them back on the wall for me. Yeah.
You guys have any questions you want to ask Letha while we're up here in conversation? Grab
Grab it?
Yeah, so I'm interested sort of like in the interaction with the viewer, right? Your pieces are really textural, they sort of have this visual experience. So do you allow people to sort of interact and touch them, play with them?
Well, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I was just thinking like, that's what I love about the books, you touch them. And to watch people go through the pages, some of the pages I do the move and then scan it and then bring it back. So it's like, what's real? Is this really a cut or not? And then they'll get to a real one. So that sense of palpable like material is like so great with a book. I mean, I personally, whenever I go into the show of mine, I touch the stuff, but like you're not supposed to touch it, right? But I kind of love that. I want it to be very touchable. And scale, like that's another thing the book is, actually I was saying, John, you know, this is technically probably the largest sculpture I've ever made by cubic feet. So, but thinking about the photo and how working with that, it could be small, it could be large. They do different things. So I love that possibility with that medium. Questions, anyone? You could ask me anything, by the way. Oh, you know, the other thing I was thinking is, you know, I came here 5 years ago or 6 years ago, did a lecture. That's how John saw my work first. You know, whatever, follows me on Instagram, sees this thing. So it's like you never know how people will see your work and then maybe years down the line it leads to something. So it's sort of like you just keep making and I don't know.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
really
always a
love
direct line to an opportunity, I guess.
I love the story of your parents giving you an artist residency. Just kind of making that space for yourself and dealing with rejection, which I talk to students about all the time, that just get used to it and let it kind of fall off you. And like you said, just put yourself out there because you never know 4 or 5 years down the road, somebody may remember your work and see it as a perfect fit for something and may reach out to you again. It's really more of like you were talking about planting seeds and hoping they show up again later.
the show I did at Art in General in 2013 was a big deal for me. It was a solo show in the space. The curator, Courtney, had found out about my work because I applied for a residency at the Lower East Side print shop, and she was like a front desk person. I was rejected from that, but she saw my work and liked it and made a studio visit with me. You know, then was a junior, curator, moved on like 5 years later. She's the head curator. And now she's like she was at the Aspen Art Museum, like Cleveland Museum. So you never know, like, that, where people will go and stuff. So that was from a rejection.
You just spent a whole, I don't remember how many months out in the West traveling after you got back from France doing your solo show there. And you took a lot of photographs. And now you're back in upstate New York, pretty fresh, right? You just got back a couple of weeks ago.
3 weeks ago, yeah.
So what, in terms of your process, what happens now? Do you have a show coming up? Do you go into an incubation stage? How do you sort of see your studio life at this point in time?
Great question. I'm like waiting. I'm like, it's like a Christmas, like, when am I gonna look at the photos I took? I'm kind of waiting as long as I can to open up the Lightroom. So that's my next step. I don't know why I hesitate. I think it's like, this excitement, because you don't want to know if they turned out really bad. But it's like this thing waiting for me. So next I will go through these images. I actually have a pretty chill like spring, which is great. So I'm just going to start making models and plans and having some studio fun to lead into. I have this other project I've been working on that's like metal book or foldable pieces that I will be showing at Higher Pictures, I think, in the fall, but that's been like sometimes the COVID stuff really push things, so.
Yeah.
But it's nice to feel right now. I mean, this is a great show for me to do at this time because I actually was able to stop and look back through some old things, Sometimes I go too fast and I'm just moving on to the next thing. It was really nice to like measure every model, photograph it, put it in a database.
I think you're in a really unique place too, because you still have a space in the city, and then you have your home, which is more in a rural setting, which I think is really appropriate for what you're doing. But can you just talk a little bit about how you use those spaces? Because they're very different. So how do you approach using those different spaces?
Yeah, I mean, basically I just, the only reason I even lived in New York for 20 years, the last 5 years, was because I found this amazing studio with all these wonderful artists on my floor. It's like a very communal vibe. And I think I lived in 13 different apartments while I lived in New York. So like the studio was really my home and my friends. So when I left, I mean, I bought this house upstate many years ago, but I was like, I just couldn't afford it. Like, it was too much to pay rent in an apartment, never have anything secured. So I moved up, me and my now husband moved upstate, and I do love working outside in the summer, like spreading out on the lawn and cutting wood and stuff is really ideal. When I go to the city, I love having this little space. My friends are there. I could have a studio visit. It's a lot of art storage, but like it's more the community. And just having a little foothold there. Maintaining a connection with proximity to. Yeah, because it is really, I mean, I still love New York City. Like it's hard. I mean, it's very hard to make art there, especially if you're a sculptor, you need space. And so, yeah, I still go back.
Yeah.
Any?
Here's a question.
I saw on Instagram that you like run the artist way kind of.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how like that influences you and your community?
Yeah, what's the artist way?
This is the class I'm teaching, the workshop.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So there's this book called The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. It's a very cheesy self-help book, right? So I read this book a couple years out of grad school. It's basically for people that are stuck in an artistic rut and they need help, like getting out. And it is cheesy, right? It's super like, what are your feelings? What did your parents do to you or whatever? Like, you gotta go deep. And I went through this book a couple years out of grad school. I didn't really think much of it at the time. And then in COVID, I started a small studio group cohort for artists. And we decided to do the Artist Way together again and go through it each week. Each week you have exercises, you meet up and you're accountable. And it was really amazing because it's sort of, one of the things she has you do is morning pages, which is like writing every morning. And actually, I've been doing that for like 15 years. That really stuck with me. And it's actually kind of an amazing process. So my friends and I decided to like run a workshop where we're doing it as a group. And I don't know, it's pretty great. It's part crit group, part reading this book, sharing work, and it's like different people, 20-year-olds, 60-year-olds, all over the country. And I think that is one of the things that is now possible, or maybe we know it's more possible with using Zoom in this way. It can be a way to create a community and have studio groups. And honestly, in my life, I've had studio groups and crit groups in one way or another almost all the time as a real way to keep you accountable and to keep you get feedback and have a conversation when you get out of school, because otherwise it's like silence, you know, and that's tough. So, sort of a long answer to your question, but hope that helps.
Yes.
Hello. So you're kind of talking about how you really sit with your images for a very long time. I guess when it sort of comes time to use them and the way that you want to display them and use them, how much of that is premeditated, or is it more of like a kind of playful, sort of controlled chance kind of scenario? So it's like if you were at Joshua Tree and you take a picture of a Joshua Tree, like, do you know exactly in that moment what you're going to use it for in the future, or is it like kind of rub the dust off the print and then it's like something completely different?
I almost never know when I'm shooting. I'm almost never shooting for something specific, except for I did a series in Joshua Tree of all these sort of like shadow photos, and I just went to Joshua Tree to shoot for that. And but even then I didn't really know what I was doing. I sort of vaguely knew. So I shoot, and that's part of it. I shoot with no preconception or real agenda, and that makes it fun. When I come back, then I'm looking through them. Sometimes I'll immediately get an idea when I see a photo for the first time. Other times, you know, I'll maybe highlight the ones I like. And other times I go back through my archive. Like this week when I was here, I had this idea with the steel beam. I wanted a photo for that, and I kind of just scrolled through and I was like, well, what if it's like an image that's, you know, I go to this area that's kind of near Nancy Holt's sun tunnels a lot. So I'm like, what if it's an image kind of from there, and I'll refer to her piece in my work. But then I throw another one in there, and it was literally like an hour ago that I finally decided which one to use. So a little bit of that is like a boom, you know, it's gonna work. But it's also like to make extras and practice, so it doesn't feel so scary, you know. It's like, well, if it doesn't work, just go print another one. So it is like a, you know, and I think if you look at the pages, you'll see. Sometimes it's a reoccurring image, and I do it over and over and over again. But it really depends on how I'm using it. So hope that answers it.
Thank you.
So another hand.
Some very back?
So I was wondering, like, about your large scale, like, sculptures. A lot of your work seems to happen simultaneously. How do you, I guess, like, go about creating those big sculptures that might be harder to create? Is it kind of like more like a half accident, or is it just
Yeah, do you need more deliberation in doing the
You mean
metal
the
sculptures?
steel ones?
Yeah.
For sure. It's like a whole different beast. It's very planned. So the playful part happens in this model iteration. From here, so one of my old roommates, I've had so many roommates in Brooklyn, one of my roommates is now a partner at a metal shop in Brooklyn that I love going to, and now, like, I will hire them to fabricate the pieces, because I can't even, none of those pieces never even come into my studio. That piece weighs 1,000 pounds. Although I did tow it with my Subaru up here, but like it came straight from the metal shop and the guy schlepped it on there. So yes, they get heavy, and in that case I'm working with those guys. But I've worked with them for so long, we have a great relationship, and they kind of know me and what I'm looking for. But I have to like check on them, and they do send me drawings, and yes, once it's in steel, it's sort of set. So good question.
You mostly have to do like a scale digital rendering for
Well, they will actually make a, make it in SketchUp or some CAD design for the final thing. Cool.
Anything else?
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for coming, and feel free to walk around. You can ask me questions. I'll be here for a little longer, and I really appreciate you coming today.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.